All right, everybody, this is episode 23 of In Liberty and Health. I got Jose Gallison. I got that right?
I usually put a little stank on the Gallison. It's a made up name, so it doesn't matter.
Gallison. All right, well, Jose Gallison, how you doing,
Yeah,
brother?
I'm doing all right, doing all right. I don't know why I'm all. If you can't tell, I'm all stuffed up for some reason. I don't know. I took my allergy meds today, so I don't know. But I mean, I probably forgot the past few days. It's one of those things my wife always bugs me about taking them
Uh,
regularly, and then I just like forget because I don't give a shit. I don't know, and then I pay the consequences later, and then my
yeah,
wife chastises me for it.
you're definitely a better person than me because my fiance has to take Allegra every day,
Yeah.
and I kind of look at her as a lesser being for having to do that. No, not really, but yeah, that shit's expensive, man. You don't. I'm glad I don't have to fuck around with that. Fucking allergies are killer. I think I'd rather have COVID again than
Yeah.
have allergies.
Yeah, I had the couve too. It was nothing. It was like I felt like I've had worse colds. It was probably worse than the majority of my colds, but I've had worse colds.
Really?
So,
Okay,
yeah.
so before we start tapping on liberty shit and post-libertarianism and beyond, I guess we'll dive into COVID real quick. Yeah, I got COVID last year in late March, and it was funny. I felt a little like just a tad under the weather. Like I didn't sleep right for like 2 or 3 days. I'm like, okay, whatever, it'll pass. And I woke up the following Monday, and all of a sudden I didn't have taste or smell. But at first, I drink dark roast coffee, so shit tastes strong. I got to take a sip of it. I'm like, something's just like not right here, but whatever. So I continue on. I made steak, eggs, and bacon for breakfast, and I took a bite out of my bacon, and I'm like, okay, I don't fucking taste this. This is fucked up, man. I
It's
don't know
awful.
what's going on. But yeah, no, that was probably one of the most heartbreaking parts about it is that I love every morning I usually have some kind of steak, bacon, or something like that. And to like not taste that first thing in the morning absolutely crushed me. And it was that way for about a week. And then, I was fine. No
Yeah.
no long haul symptoms. I used a glutathione nasal spray, took vitamin D, alpha lipoic acid, and zinc, and everything came back after a week.
Yeah. Me, I didn't have the taste or smell thing. I think one of my kids said they lost it a little bit, but I don't think they did because they're kids and they're not very good at describing. I think they were just like stuffed up and so they couldn't
Mm.
smell. And so if you can't smell as well, that affects your taste. So, but I don't know. Yeah, it was really not that bad, and I didn't take anything like at all
Mhm.
because like as I point out the allergy things, I'm the kind of guy that like I don't know, this is a thing I inherited from my stepdad, who was pretty much like basically like my dad like growing up, but he's always been the kind, and me, I've been the kind that we're really bad about taking meds. We're just more the kind of people just to like
Walk it
plow
off.
through everything like it's not happening. Like
Mm.
most of the times when I'm sick, like when I was a kid, it was my mother, and now that I'm an adult, it's my wife that'd be like, "You're sick." I'd be like, "No, I'm not." Like, "You're sick." "No, I'm not." And then I'd have to eventually be like, "Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sick."
no, I definitely know how that goes because I like never call off of work. The only time I called off last year, I had this fucked up stomach bug, and I won't go on air about how bad this was, but it was one of the worst things I ever to go through in my fucking life. And I thought I had COVID, so initially I was like, all right, well, I'm just gonna hang out home. And my boss even was like, hey, go get tested, and I did. And dude, that getting the initial test where they shove that fucker up in your brain was probably worse than having COVID itself, to be completely honest. At least for me. My fiance, she got it too, and she just lost her smell for a month. That was literally it. So I guess beyond the vid, um, I was listening to your appearance on Adam Nutter's podcast, and Adam's fucking awesome dude. But you kind of came into the liberty movement as a neocon, if I kind of heard that right. You were listening to
I
like a
mean,
lot of
sort of.
neocon right
I,
wingers.
I mean, I think I've described it as sort of neocon, but I usually try to put the caveat as like it's almost not even fair to call it neocon because it was more just like I'm 30, so to put that in context, so like so people can figure out like where it was growing up, kind of deal. I grew up in the set. Well, I sort of south. I've always been a rural. I lived in Maine until high school. In high school, I moved to Tennessee, but I've always lived in a rural area, so I was fairly conservative. And so it was more just like Fox News. And so of the time, this was before the Trump wave had come through, obviously. So like me growing up during that time, like how I was influenced. So it was that earlier era of Fox where it was more neocon-ish, but it wasn't necessarily that me or my family were neocons. We were just, we didn't have really strong convictions. We just, when we did have the news or talk radio on, it would be Fox News or it would be Rush Limbaugh or whatever. And so it was kind of neocon-ish, but it wasn't like
Sure.
we were like principled neocons. It wasn't like we
Right.
thought deeply about this. We just kind of vaguely were like, yeah, that's kind of, I guess that's what we believe. Sure. You know, like it,
Mm.
and that was that. So, I mean, I don't know if I'd necessarily call it a neocon. Really, it was more just a center right kind of deal. But like, but you know, at the end of the day, like if I was to stamp down my positions, they pretty much were all neocon positions, but they weren't really positions I was firmly set on. So yeah,
Mm.
that's kind of where I was at.
Okay, yeah, I gotcha. And then for you, much like me, I kind of had the similar background where it was like I kind of defaulted right, but I didn't really think about it all that much. My brother was a raging leftist and raging atheist, and I know you talk about the atheist, the agnostic, gnostic, and stuff like that. And I kind of want to talk about it too. But he was the raging atheist liberal when we were kids, and he loved The Amazing Atheist and would pound leftist stuff to me all the
Oh,
time.
Amazing Atheist, that guy. Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't even like him when I was really deep in that stuff. He was
Mhm.
never really I don't know. Yeah, anyways, go on.
Yeah, no, he that was his thing, and then eventually the one day he's just said, "Oh no, I'm a libertarian." I said, "But you said you were a liberal like a week ago." He's like, "No, I'm actually a libertarian." I'm like, "Well, just don't fucking talk to me until you know what the fuck you are." And then over time, you know, I started listening to more and more people who consider themselves libertarian, and it kind of pulled me from the neocon-ish area to the more libertarian area. So the reason for explaining that was essentially it seems like you kind of went down the same rabbit hole.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean the atheism theism thing didn't really happen until like that was actually like early on, and like when I around the shortly after being married and early on to start my family. But like that was like early 20s for me, because I for if you know, you're unaware, I mean maybe you are aware, I'm 30, but I've been married, it'll be 10 years
Oh wow.
here in like was in 5 days, I'll be 10 years. So it'll be the 6th, it'll be 10 years, and we have 2 kids, both girls. We have an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old. So
Mm.
yeah, we got to fucking early. So but yeah, so that's kind of where I was. But
Mhm.
and it's kind of funny because it's like I know Dave Smith always talks about like how like with his kids and it made him religious and stuff, and I'm not saying my kids made me not religious, but it is kind of funny when I hear him tell that story, and like it was all super religious. And I get that too, because I do remember when I had my kids and it was beautiful moments, but I guess for me I never really like equated that to a religious thing. But I mean, whatever, to each their own. I'm not like at all throwing shade. It's just kind of funny. It's like this reverse thing. But yeah, that's shortly around that time when I started going down that route. And ironically, like atheism in a sense did kind of bring me down the libertarian road, because for me, the only reason I really started getting really interested in logic and stuff like that was because of that, because I did sort of start losing my faith, and it just didn't, a lot of the things weren't adding up to me in religion. And I know a lot of people, it's fucking irritating. Will because like one thing Reed said before, I remember there was a tweet he put out a while back, forever ago, where he was like, you know, one thing that made me not religious was reading the Bible. And I know he very got a lot of flack from religious people, like, oh, how did say you haven't read the Bible without saying you read the Bible and shit like that. And it's like, whatever. It's to some extent it's kind of true. I grew up in a Christian home. I went to Christian school. I was religious well into my early 20s. It was something I took seriously. I've read, multiple books of the Bible. I'm not at all going to claim that I've read the entire Bible. Like I've read a lot of it. And I've, literally like when I went to school as a kid, it would be, we had a Bible class. So like I was deep into that shit. So, but a lot of it just wasn't adding up to me. And then when that stopped adding up to me, I kind of started losing my faith. And I remember I started getting arguments with my family, and they'd be like, they'd always question it as if I was just like, just willy nilly just doing this and being like, oh, almost like I was stupid. And I got irritated with it. I was like, you know what? Fuck you. Like, I'm not going to like put up with this shit. So like I just like, you know what, I'm gonna really look into this stuff. And it was partially like, it wasn't even entirely that. It also too was like, you know, like I don't necessarily even really want to. If I'm wrong, I want to know, because like I'd rather believe this is real and there's a heaven and all this shit. And the more I dug into it, the more I was like, this doesn't add up. And it kind of also started giving me logical tools, you know, because like going down that, you know, once you start really exploring philosophy, you start learning about fallacies and stuff like that, and like how to properly utilize logic. And that did inevitably lead me down the road to like libertarianism and then anarchy and stuff. Because once you start applying those same logical principles elsewhere, then you're like, oh. And it is funny because there is actually a legit problem in the atheist community of fucking like really statist people, or especially like liberal types, which it is weird because it's like, it's someone who like, you know, went down that route. You look back, you're like, how, like, why, like all these same arguments you make for against God are the same arguments you can make against the state, like for the most part. So it's like I don't get, but I don't know, some of the best ones like you know, Matt Dillahunty, if that name rings a bell. People out there listening probably that might ring a bell. Like he's a big name. Like he's extremely intelligent person, well versed in logic, in philosophy and stuff, but extremely cringe liberal and like super statist. But and it is like it's weird, this cognizant dissonance that happens. But yeah, that's what took me down that road. And I started learning logic through there, and I started applying it to libertarianism as well. And yeah, kind of droning on now, but you get the point.
Yeah, no, you're good. Yeah, the whole religion thing is really, really interesting to me. My fiance considers herself religious, and it's not like a active thing, you know what I mean? Like she just says, yeah, I believe in God. There's been enough things in my life that make me believe in that. And I've always considered myself really, up until probably about the last 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago, I consider myself an agnostic atheist. Now, I don't know if I consider myself an agnostic theist or what, but I feel a greater purpose, and this sounds so woo-woo and arbitrary, but I don't know. It feels more meaningful when I think about religion, and I see the good in it. Listening to Jordan Peterson a lot, which I don't do as much anymore, but hearing his takes on religion and how he kind of distills it, I don't want to say it necessarily convinced me or converted me, but it definitely made me more open to the idea. But I'm not heavily invested in either camp, that there is or isn't, because like I've heard you say, I'm not arrogant enough to say absolutely I know or I don't know.
Yeah. Which, yeah, I mean, I've said before, I don't necessarily have a problem with atheists or theists. It's Gnostics I don't really like of either ilk. Because because a lot of people just don't understand their terms. I always try to equate it to like the grid, where you'll see like libertarian to authoritarian, or left and right,
yeah.
you know, like that grid that we usually use to like describe where you are politically. That's kind of works along the same lines too with when it comes to like this. You have along one vertex, you have theism, atheism, and along the other one, you have gnosis, agnostic. All that mean atheism or theism is simply a question of belief. Like, what do you believe? And in Gnostic, agnostic is a question of knowledge, and that's all it is. So if you're agnostic, you don't know. If you're Gnostic, you know. If you're theist, you believe. If you're atheist, you don't believe. And so that's why you can have you can have a Gnostic theist, an agnostic theist, you can have a Gnostic atheist, and an agnostic atheist. Those are all possible combinations. And I really, pretty much the Gnostics are people I don't like. Like anyone who has any sort of certitude, and not even like necessarily certitude, but to claim knowledge, to say you know, because the fuck you don't. No, you don't. Like you don't know. Like like it's almost a misnomer, the agnostic Gnostic thing, because it's like you don't. But it's more just that you're arrogant enough to claim you know. Like it's more of a knowledge claim really than an actual like whether they really do or not, because none of us really fucking know whether there is a God or isn't.
Right.
I mean, I think we should all be able to be mature enough to admit that. I mean, there are people of both sides that claim that. I find those people to be silly. You know, like because that's the one thing people always like come with atheists, like, oh, you know, there's not a God. And like, the vast majority of atheists don't make that claim. So it's just a silly way to disparage your I don't know, your ideological perceived enemy is all it is, and it's not legit at all. I mean, there are atheists that claim they know there's no God, but there's also theists who claim they know there's a God, and I find them both to be equally ridiculous. Although I actually guess I would say the atheists are a little bit more ridiculous, the Gnostic atheists, because to claim knowledge of something not existing is impossible. Because to claim knowledge of something existing, you could be proven right. You cannot be proven right to claim something doesn't exist, because it's an unprovable claim. So because if you're someone who claims you know there is God, technically God could be like, hey, what's up? And okay, yeah, yep, you're right. But there's no way to assert a negative in that sense. So yeah.
Yeah, I got you. So I guess kind of two things I wanted to dive down on this rabbit hole, and I wasn't planning on talking about religion all that much, but now that we're kind of on it, I actually do want to talk a lot about this. Are you familiar with Stefan Molyneux at all?
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with work. I've gone on a couple little dives. He's all right. I never really completely got the allure of him, but I find him to have some interesting stuff to say.
I really liked his work mostly on peaceful parenting and philosophy. Those are the two main things that I really took away from him. And back when he was on YouTube, he had countless hours of shows of just talking people through relationship stuff and trauma. And I don't know, that always was fascinating to me. And a lot of people, I think, kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, where they see some of his endorsements of Trump and the white nationalist kind of stuff. And I don't think he's a white nationalist.
I mean, I don't even care about that. I do want to say, when I was caveating that I don't know him super well, that wasn't me trying to distance myself.
Yeah, no,
not saying that for you, but for the audience, I wasn't at all trying to distance myself. I'm just not super familiar with work. I do know there is that stigma, and I don't care. Whatever.
Yeah, right. Because and this is what I get from you, is that you're very open. You're open to the ideas, even if there's somebody that you're completely ideologically opposed to. You're still open to learning something from them. Kind of the tirade I was getting on there, though, is that he is essentially a Gnostic atheist, where he says that his claim, kind of telling on what you were saying, he said that if there were to be a God, then it would not be in the form that we understand it. And to that, okay, he essentially, it's that if there ever were to be a provable God, then it just would not be the God that people believe, and that's how he knows that there's no God. I know I'm completely butchering that.
I think I know what you're getting at. I have heard this argument before from atheists, and there is merit to this argument of, because it is a matter of define what you mean. So if you're talking to someone, you're like, all right, define what you mean when you say God. And if someone says this, you can, depending on how they define it, prove them wrong. So, because that is one thing a lot of people do, is they'll look at the God of the Bible and they'll be like, well, there's no way he could do this and do that, or they'll point to specific things. And so, because the thing is, God is really this ethereal term. It's really however you define it. I think that's kind of what he's getting at. I'm kind of conjecturing, but I have heard this argument where people do assert there is no God, but based on a specific definition of a God. So, if you're like, I don't know, the God of the Muslims or something, sure, I guess you could point to certain things in scripture and be like, here's contradictory things. There's no way this and that and blah, blah. I mean, that's just a specific example. I mean, or if you're talking to someone, you're having an interaction, you're like, hey, and they're like, oh, you're just having a debate about God, and you get them to define what they believe God is, and they give you a very specific definition of God, and you're like, well, I can pretty much prove that wrong and assert that God doesn't exist. Because that's the other thing too. On the other hand, the theist will, generally speaking, when you debate whether there's a God or not, it'll always be the shifting terms. And this is really, it's more important than anything in the atheism world, but this really applies to other places as well. Defining your terms is insanely important.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm sorry to cut you off here, but this kind of to your point, and this is another question I was going to ask you, but we're kind of approximating it. Jordan Peterson, I really, really like the way that he phrases it when people ask him if he believes in God, because his next question is always, what do you mean by God? Because, okay, is it just uttering the words, I believe in God? Or, is it the way you act? What is your definition? This is, once again, kind of going back to what you're saying by defining things. Um, People just saying they believe in God, that's so arbitrary if you actually think about it for more than just a second. Because you could say you believe in God and then that's it. And then you carry on your life in a way that may be completely counterproductive to a God that may be your social norm, right? So do you find it that a lot of times people may say they believe in God, but it's not necessarily approximating what you may think they mean? That's so woo woo, but I think you kind of get where I'm going.
I think I get where you're going, but for me, I don't really, because I will totally, if I'm interacting with someone and I'm like, hey, okay, they say I believe in God, say for some whatever reason, this hypothetical, we're having this discussion, and they go, and I go, okay, define God, and they go, well, I just think God is like love, man, and I think it's kind of like the universe, and I would go, in it, I mean, I'd obviously probably be sarcastic about it, but I'd be like,
Nah.
well, then I guess I believe in God too. Like, because if that's how we're defining it, sure.
Yeah.
But like, so it really is like it's situational depending on how you define it. Because there are people who, I mean, that's joking, but that is not at all a joke. There are totally people who just go like, well, I don't know, man. I just think it's kind of like the universe. And like, I think if you just like kind of bring everything together, it kind of creates this like sort of sentient thing. And it's like, I don't know. It's like, it just things happen. And it's like, is this like God's, and it just gets very vague. And you're like, okay, sure, man. If you're defining God as the universe, yep, there's totally a God. I don't know. Sure.
Oh, well, you can't pin the tail on a donkey at that point.
Like it, and I guess that we get into weird, like people would say it's almost like postmodern, but words really are given meaning by their user. So if like
Right.
the mouse sound God, if someone is using that to mean a certain thing, I can't necessarily say they're wrong. I mean, I can be like, well, that's not how most people mean it. So I mean, it's a little bit off. That's not the normal use, but that's their use. So whatever. But yeah, I don't know if that answered it for you, but I don't know. I mean, maybe I was missing the point.
No, it's just essentially, I think to Jordan Peterson's point, it would be that when people say, I believe in God, it is almost like an arrogant claim because you're saying that you believe that this God is real, right? But if you say that, you start kind of peeling away the letter, or peeling back the layers here, and let's dig deeper to what that means. Then an almighty being who creates and destroys and is able to govern being as it is, right? So if you say that you believe that and all the consequences that come with that, and the God of, let's say, the Bible context, where you will be punished to, eternal damnation for doing bad things, then just saying you believe in it, but you don't carry that action out. Do you really believe it if you don't carry out? Yeah. Yeah, that's essentially what I was saying. Once again, sorry to go on a longer tirade, but
it's kind
the
of
greater
like
point is, do you ethically believe that, and do you act that out?
Honestly, I think this is, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a huge fan of Pearson when it comes to religious stuff. I do like him a lot of stuff. I think he literally just plays hide the ball with whatever the hell he means when he's religious, and that's what it is. It's like, and people will be like, do you believe in God? Like, I remember like to bring up Matt Dillahunty again. I remember he had a debate, I believe, with Jordan Pearson.
Yeah,
on
I
religion,
didn't recognize the name at first, but then it occurred to me.
They literally, I don't remember if it was like an hour and a half, 2 hours. It was literally just a couple hours of them trying to get to fucking define what the hell Peterson is talking about. Yeah. And it's like, dude, just say what the fuck you mean. Like,
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
like motherfucker talks in riddles. Like, and it's like, I kind of get it in one sense. It is, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan when it comes to religious stuff because it is just kind of it just comes nonsense, and he'll be like essentially essentially saying, oh, I just like religion because he's the utility of it, and then but I believe in God in a certain sense, and but in a way that's not really believing God, and then next thing I'll be like, I believe in God. Like, dude, what do you mean? And it's just all over the place. So I do think you get really squirrely, and I think I'm gonna probably piss off some people, but I think Peterson has a tendency to talk in deepities, which is like
Mhm.
essentially like stuff that sounds profound but really isn't. Like when
I
you
totally
really
get what you're saying. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
when you peel it away, you're like, oh, you just said something that sounds really smart, but it kind of means a whole lot of nothing, and it's kind of like,
Mhm.
okay, can you just say what you mean, man? I don't know, because yeah, here we are. Like, I get what you're saying though, where because I've heard him make this point though, where it's like if you're not acting it out, and he's made this case kind of be like, oh, I believe in God in the sense of I behave as if there is a God, and it's good to behave as if there's a God or whatever. I'm sure I'm butchering it, but
No, that's pretty much it.
and like you can be like, well, if there's a religious person who says I believe in God, but they don't behave like there's a God. I mean, it's. I feel like these are almost two different things, and it is kind of in this ridiculous sense because, and then I guess this comes as really maybe I now I think about it, I think that's actually a little bit of conflating what we were talking about before earlier with the Gnostic, agnostic, theist, atheist, because belief and knowledge are different
Right.
things. So with that, like if you say you have a religious person who's not behaving as if there's a God, you'd be like, well, look at you, you don't really believe in a God because you piece of shit, you sin. And it's like, if
Yeah.
you really thought you were gonna go to hell over this, you wouldn't do that now, would you? And it's like, okay, but like he doesn't know there's a God, and it's so. And then there's also a multitude of other reasons that like that's a little ridiculous, but I mean,
Mhm.
it is kind of conflating things. I don't really see the merit. I do think that's a good thing to kind of like remind religious people to kind of like behave as if there's a God. I also think it's good to kind of like, it kind of does demonstrate the utility of religion, because I am not at all a atheist who thinks there is no utility in religion. I'm actually like, I'm I mean, you can call it a little bit like Machiavellian, but I actually like the idea of there being religion, because I don't think there's much utility in like, I think it's a lot easier for, especially in a modern day sense of, because I think the modern day conception of especially Christianity is just like,
Mhm.
hey, do good things and don't do bad things. And I mean, I can totally make the argument that if you look at the Bible from, in the older times, and I can totally point out things in the Bible that are fucked up. And I'm sure that people can make like different apologetics for it and stuff, but that's beside the point. My point I'm getting at now, I mean, that's a whole other argument of like whether the Bible's actually a good, like once you dig deep, a good moral arbiter. But that aside, in its current form, what the Bible basically is in Christianity at whole, uh, for the most part, is a quick and easy, rough, like, way to go about living your life. And its modern interpretation is kind of a generic do good things, don't do bad things. And yeah, I'm sure someone can point out like, well, this thing's bad, the gay thing or whatever. And I mean, let's be real, like, I know a lot of people try to make arguments about the Bible being okay with the gays. The fuck it is. I don't tell you, like, there's multiple verses where they're pretty straightforward, but
Mhm.
whatever. I mean, but that kind of more so goes to my point I'm getting at, where there are people who already interpret it as, well, it's okay with a gay thing. So I'm like, okay, I don't care. Like, if you can see this ideology, this book, and you can interpret this as like roughly, I want to do good things and not do bad things, and this is a quick and easy thing for you, I'm fine with that. I
Mhm.
obviously don't think it's the most logically consistent, but and I would prefer someone to be like, I could be like, hey, well, let me talk to you about NAP, this, that, this. But I understand that's not for the layman. That's not really practical, and it may be a little bit more practical to be like, hey, here's this religion thing, here's this inbuilt community, whatever, blah blah blah. Like, go ahead, have it, like whatever. I'm fine with that. Like, I don't need everyone to be an atheist. I don't care. Like, I mean, I
Mhm.
do think it's what's most logically consistent. So ideally, I would like someone to be at that point to where they have completely big brained worked out their morality and everything through a logical framework, like I believe I have. And you know what, I might be
Mhm.
wrong, but at I know that's not realistic, and I'm completely fine with people having a quick and easy thing that's a rough approximation and it's kind of close. So
Right. Well, in my mind, and I want your take on this as well, when it comes to Christianity and, generally people who consider themselves religious, um, I think it goes well with social conservatism. I mean, they obviously go hand in hand oftentimes. And in my mind, social conservatism is a great way to it's a great foundation for a prosperous and free society because you have respect for property rights, you have respect for families, and those two things together are what tolerate freedom the best because once again you're raising responsible families in tight-knit communities that don't need a big government to supply them with anything because once again they go to their neighbor when times are tough. um and you don't see this as much with people who are atheists. A lot of people on the left are, overpopulation, um, don't have kids because you're gonna pollute the earth. Um, let's just get married and have orgies with a bunch of people. And obviously, not all leftists are like this, and not all right wingers are like this either. But in my mind, I think the best ground for libertarianism is social conservatism, which typically goes hand in hand with religion. And that's not to say that you can't have a libertarian society that's made up of atheists, but I think social conservatism tends to be more complementary to libertarian. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think what you're touching on right now is kind of a little bit what I was touching on before, where I was kind of getting at. I don't care if someone gets to the point where they have completely logically worked out their entire philosophy and worked out the morality and how it's consistent in this and blah, 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 blah. Like, and that kind of touches on what I'm getting at is, do you want more libertarians or do you want more liberty? And that's another thing that we that's been a frequent talking point in the space.
Yeah, I really want to get to this.
And it's
too.
like, I genuinely don't. I mean, I do care. I care, but not that much. I care far more about liberty than creating libertarians. I care about creating libertarians, but a little less so. If I can get you to a place to where you're I guess you could almost say a useful idiot for liberty, then I'm fine with it. Like, it's kind of, I guess, flipping that on the head of the what the useful idiots for, like, commies or whatever the fuck, where it's usually used. But I'm fine with having useful idiots for liberty. Like, I mean, I can be like, well, you're not completely right, but I'm not gonna be like, look at you, you're wrong. Like, I mean, you're wrong, but in a way I want you to be wrong, so I'm fine with it. Like,
well, either that or you could say, you're right for the wrong reasons, but either way it's fine. And after having Tho Bishop on the other day, it really shook a lot of my biases up because I went into that podcast with a lot of assumptions about him, and 100% of those assumptions are a fault of my character. I assumed a lot of, I don't want to say necessarily bad intentions, but I had a lot of assumptions about him just because he was touting himself as a pro GOP guy. And for a long time, just because I worked with a bunch of boomer cons, I sharply rejected all Republican politics just because after seeing 4 years of Trump, he kind of proved that a lot of Republicans are just closet socialists because they'll make the argument that, oh, well, he had to sign stimulus checks because people really needed it. Okay, well, now you just conceded to point to the Democrats because Democrats say that people need welfare because, well, they just really need it. But putting that aside, the reason why I kind of went on this tangent is because it complements the point of that now the GOP is in a position of being useful idiots for libertarians. And that's not to say they are useful idiots, but they're essentially in this position of they're radicalized against the establishment. And if you have someone who's able to quell that anger and that resentment and that distrust that Trump had sown, then you could really propel forward a large part of the liberty movement. And I know you're a little bit more of the agorist, bunch, and I want to talk about that as well. But 2022, 2024, I think is a huge opportunity for the liberty movement as a whole. And same as you, I don't care about the Libertarian Party. I don't care about the GOP. I don't care about the Democrat Party. I want liberty. I'm not specifically ideologically or dogmatically paired to any of these parties. If there's a bunch of useful idiots who are GOP people that are chanting the same things that all the libertarians are, then by all means sign me up, put a MAGA hat on me if we're going to abolish the Fed. But if the Libertarian Party looks more promising in that regard, then I'm going to be closer to the Libertarian Party. Or the post-libertarian route where you just build up local communities, which I guess the LPMC wants to do the same thing. Or, the GOPMC or the post-libertarian thing is kind of a little bit more agorist, or at least to my understanding. I'm not ideological about any of these. Whichever one works, sign me up. That's what I want, is just more liberty, and whichever one is the best way to do that, it's cool with me.
Yeah. Was there a question? I agree.
Yeah, well, so you seem a little bit. I don't want to come at you in a hostile way, but
No,
I don't. I don't.
you seem like a faggot.
Yeah, well, all right, yeah, fair
I'm just
enough.
kidding.
Um,
No, I'm just fucking with you. No, I was
yeah,
saying like
no,
you saying it to me. I was just playing.
okay, I'm
I
sorry.
wasn't calling you a faggot. I was just being silly.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. You don't seem too staked into politics. From what I've heard of most of you, you seem a little bit more agorist or even
Yeah,
post-libertarianism.
I consider myself an agorist. Yeah.
Okay. Um, Now what about
Well,
the post-libertarianism? What's kind of your take on that?
I mean, the post-libertarianism. I think it was LB Munez said lately. It's not really a so much a ideology or thing so much as a moment, and it's kind of just a cluster.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
clusterfuck of things. But I kind of like where their heads at because
It
while I am
seems
an
more
yeah,
agorist.
yeah, sort of. I mean, they're more agorist friendly, I guess. Not to say
Mhm.
that LPMC is not agorist friendly, but
Sure.
I don't know. I mean, to touch on the agorist point with the thing, um, like if I was to pair agorism with anything, I would pair it with the post libertarians because
Sure.
like the common point that the like LP guys will always make, and they're like, well, let's do both. Like we'll have your political side, and you guys can go do the agorism shit. And it's kind of like, for me, it's like, well, what do you even have to offer me here? Like you have nothing to offer me. Like I don't know what this pairing you think is. Like, I
Mhm.
mean, while I don't necessarily agree with like it's not my ideal route utilizing, any of the different, post-libertarian routes that they're proposing. It's still kind of like, well, at least I can see like some sort of like offering there that pairs with what I'm doing. Whereas the LP, it's like, you're going to give me political cover? You don't have political cover to give. What are you talking about? But like, I mean, so cool. All right, buddy.
Mhm.
Like, kind of thumbs up. Like, okay, like whatever. But God, I was, yeah. I mean, so I guess if I'm going to compare the two, yeah. I mean, I guess that's one more friendly to, and I guess I'm a little bit different than most agorists in that, like, I I'm not necessarily like I don't have this like allergic aversion to like any of the other routes. I have no problem expressing like my preferences because I do have an
Sure.
order of preferences. So like while I do think ideally, like it's kind of the same thing I guess with the atheism thing. Like I would prefer like if I could magically get everyone in the world to like have a consistent, well thought out moral philosophy that worked out well and they didn't believe in God or whatever, like sure, okay, cool. But I know that's not really the most legit. So I still have my order of preferences. So like I guess, to put it in that framework, I sort of prefer like a generic Christian like Southern Baptist over a fucking I don't know what's I'm trying to think of what the bad Muslims are, and there's like the Shiite, the Sunnis, I forget which one's the bad ones, but one of
Mm.
the ones that are like fucking hacking heads off and shit. Like I prefer that over that, but because
Mm.
one's a little bit more cohesive to what I'm going for.
Right.
So I have my orders of preferences, and I'll be straight up. Probably one of my last order of preferences is anything LP related. I
Mhm.
don't really feel like the LP has much to offer at all. Personally, I might be wrong.
Mhm.
Like if I had to say like if I had to like gun to my head, I couldn't support agorism at all. It would probably be my next order of preference would be the Hoppians. So I guess kind of
Mhm.
almost kind of what like Popular Liberty's doing or trying to do, stuff like that, taking over your local area, kind of working from there. Because in a sense, I actually see that's kind of what agorism is, but politically. Because to me, I see agorism as creating spaces of liberty. And I know a lot of people like to make the like with agorism will be like, oh, you're just gonna get Ruby Ridge or you're gonna get Waco. And it's like, okay, but most agorists you talk to aren't saying, hey, I'm gonna go out in the woods with my family and live a self-sustaining lifestyle by ourselves, or just with a small community go live by ourselves and throw the middle finger up to the feds. Most agorists are like, we should create a fucking decentralized network of us. I'll trade with you, you trade with me, and like that type of stuff. So it is like this silly straw man when people say, "Oh, you're just gonna get Waco'd." Like no one's fucking saying that. Like no one's saying that's what we're gonna. Okay, maybe not no one. I'm sure there's some idiot agorist out there who's like, "I'm gonna go out and live in the woods," and cool. I mean, go. Whatever this is gonna do, go for it. Like cool. I mean, I don't feel like it's ideal. I feel like humans need other humans to trade and interact with, but like, and yeah, but I think the more people you get living along an agorist type lifestyle of, trading and to some extent disregarding the state, not entirely, because that's another misconception. People will be like, that you're just going to entirely exist in the black market and do everything illegal. It's like, no, that's how you get put in jail. Anyone who's read Konkin knows that like he legit in there is like, you should you're weighing the pros and cons, like if you're like, hey, should I evade taxes for this one thing? It's like, it shouldn't just be a yes. It should be, well, what is the consequences if I get caught? And how likely am I to get caught? And if you're very likely to get caught and it's a high consequence, you might want to just, follow the law in that situation. So,
yeah, it's kind of like the January 6th deal. It's like, look, I agree with you guys saying fuck the Capitol and let's go make some noise. But like, you realize if you were actually a threat, like you would be put into dust in the blink of an eye if they legitimately thought you were a threat. Like, you do not attack these blood-soaked monsters directly.
I mean, a good one I like to use, a frequent example, is there's this video I saw of this guy who got pulled over by the cops. And he wasn't really doing anything wrong. I can't remember what exactly he got pulled over for. It wasn't anything crazy. I want to say it was something silly like an expired tag or some shit. And like he was like, said they tried to get him out. They were trying to pull him out of the car multiple times. He was like, "Hey, just leave me alone. I just want to go home." He was fully like, sober. Didn't seem out of it, anything. So I just want to go home. Like, I'm just leave me alone. Like, just leave me alone. And they kept trying to pull out of the car. They tased him multiple times. They finally yanked him out of the car. And when they yanked him out of his car, he pulled out his gun and blew them both away. He like just offed both the cops. Just done. And like, I can, in my mind, I cannot see anything morally wrong with that. But that was fucking retarded.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very glad you said that, because see, and this is where I get annoyed with some libertarians, because some libertarians I think are so autistic at the point where they're saying, "Oh, all police are bad people, and well, fuck it, it's morally wrong. If they attack me, I'm getting back at them." Like, let's think about this for a second. If you actually do anything to a cop, you realize you lose every time. Like, there is no, the judge does not care about the non-aggression principle, and the judge is not a fucking libertarian. They do not care. They're there to keep the police happy, to throw people in jail. They're there to get court cases done, and whatever the fuck they're doing. They do not care about Mises or Rothbard or anything like that. So if you fuck around and find out, it's kind of on you at that point. And look, I agree completely. It's morally consistent. If a cop pulls you out of a car and you don't want to be pulled out of the car and you shoot him, if we're living in Nancapistan, by all means, you had every right to do that. But we're not Nancapistan. So this also kind of pivots to another point, and I think probably part of the reason why you consider yourself more of an agorist and are more open to the post-libertarianism thing than anything else is that a lot of libertarians have been very, very bad at adjusting to the facts on the ground. I think I tweeted with you a couple of times about the public park deal. It's like, dude, we're being stolen from, and you're literally just telling people, "Oh, privatize the parks." I've said this on a couple shows before, but it bears repeating. This is like when you see a fat person and they ask, "How do I lose weight?" and you just shout caloric deficit at them. It's like, okay, yeah, you need that, and everybody agrees, but what does that look like? So if you have a homeless dude doing heroin on the bench at your daughter's nearest park, is it really okay to just sit there and shout, "Privatize the parks"? Like, this is nothing for anybody in the current moment. So I think this is what draws a lot of people away from the libertarian message, is that not many libertarians are actually offering solutions right now. And that's what people want, is solutions right now. People have a very, what would that be, a high time preference, low time
Yeah, it'd
preference?
be a high time preference.
Okay,
Which,
yeah, they want solutions right now. They don't
yeah,
care about Ancapistan. They care about, what are you going to do to get this homeless man out of the fucking park?
yeah. Yeah, which I mean, I do want to say real quick. A lot of people use high time preference or low time preference. I get it's a joke sometimes, so it's depending on how it's used. But some people legitimately use it and be like, "Well, that's just high time preference." And it's like high time preference does not always necessarily mean bad,
Mhm.
because, for example, if I don't know if I'm being attacked, I'm in a situation where I have a high time preference to respond or whatever. Maybe that's not the best example, but it's like it depends on the situation. Like it depends on what's going on. Like what are we talking about? So like in the situation of like you go to the park and some homeless dude's masturbating, you're in a high time preference situation. You're like, I really want to get him the fuck out of here right the fuck now. Like, and there's nothing that doesn't mean it's bad. It's just
Right.
describing like how much time you're willing to have a payoff, and
Mhm.
how much payoff you're likely to have. And like, so it doesn't necessarily mean bad. A lot of people describe meaning to high or low time preference, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily, I don't know how this equates to agorism when it comes to that question, because I actually kind of got a little bit of flack from people who consider themselves agorists, because I was a little bit more friendly to late Rothbard, because it's like, for me, I mean, I don't have any problem with that. Like, I don't know. When you're talking about the tragedy of the commons, when you're talking about public property, which is like kind of a fucking contradiction in terms,
Right.
but like whatever, the government's claimed the property. It's I don't know. We're in this weird area, and I don't know. Like I guess yeah. Obviously, if a homeless man's sitting there politely reading a book, and I send the cops after them, yeah, that's shitty. But
Right.
like if it is something like, because that's the thing too with that situation, everyone was like immediately assuming the worst. You're like, what do you mean, all homeless people? Like, no, like, and
People
I,
took the nuance right the fuck out of it, and
yeah,
that was the
like,
most irritating part.
yeah, like, no, like if you're shitting on the street, like that's the homeless person we're talking about. Like,
Yeah.
and like, sure, you can be like, oh, that guy's shooting up over there. He's not breaking the AP. He's just shooting himself up. It's like, I don't know, man. I feel like it's pretty fair to say that if this were a private system, that wouldn't be happening, and it's completely fair to be like, hey, get out of here. I don't know. I do feel like there is some, I don't know what principle this is, but there is a point where when you're looking at public property and stuff where it's like there is some reasonableness to be applied, and it is. I mean, I don't know. It's a situation of I know. I heard Ace. Ace probably made the best argument for this. In
Mhm.
like, he basically was making a homesteading argument, but even then, man, that just gets too out there. I don't know what the consistent principle thing is, but I don't really necessarily see a problem with that. I don't know, like,
Mhm.
and I get, because a lot of people will be like, like see the late Rothbard quote of "unleash the cops" or whatever, and they're like, they're like, oh my god, and there is that last line of like, subject, of course, to liability when in error, and
Mhm.
fairly, people will point out, be like, well, they don't ever really, it's like, okay, well, you kind of got to push for both. I don't know what to tell you, like that
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're gonna get both or either or whatever, but I don't know. It's kind of one of those spots where there's no right answer, and that's kind of what government
Mhm.
does. It blurs the lines, but I don't know. I don't really necessarily have a right or wrong answer there. I mean, I do think some agorists got pissed for my take, because I'm not necessarily saying that's what you should do, and it is a little bit situational, but I'm not necessarily against that either. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna lose any sleep if they fucking kick some bums out of the fucking home, out of the park, and like,
Right.
I mean, I don't know. Like, and I like, if there are bums, sleeping in a state park out of the way of not, no one's paying attention to them, I have no problem with that. Like, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, it's different. It's a different thing. If you're in the middle of the day sleeping with a newspaper blanket and in a place where people frequent, it's something's just off about that. I don't know. I mean, there are plenty of other places to go. I don't know what to
Yeah.
say. Maybe that makes me a bad person, a bad agorist. I don't give a fuck.
Well, to kind of answer your question earlier, it was I think that's probably what pushes you away from the Libertarian Party in some
Yeah.
respects, because a lot of these lawbirds, if you will, would say they're going to take this kernel of truth, right? where it's not perfectly libertarian to use the police to physically remove somebody. They're going to take that little kernel of truth, and it's like, okay, you got a point. It's not perfectly libertarian, but they're going to try and make a whole bag of popcorn with that little kernel of truth. And this is what people tend to do. GOP did it with China. The Democrats do it with institutional racism. They take just one thing that has that kernel of truth, and they once again try to make a whole bag out of it, so that way they can make the biggest case possible for why they should get more power. No, it's not perfectly libertarian, but once again, there are social norms that need to be upheld. And if people had private parks, then they would make sure that if you're paying to enter these parks, whatever, that there are certain norms that need to be followed. And if those norms aren't followed, then guess what? If you don't politely leave, you're physically removed because you're now trespassing on someone's private property. And I think that's the way that everybody was interpreting this whole park situation, is that, hey, we're being stolen from to maintain this park and to pay for the police. If they have to remove somebody from public property who's violating the social norms for other people who aren't harming anybody or violating said social norms, then I don't think anybody should really have a problem with somebody that's violating the general, and I hate to keep saying it, but general social norms. I don't think everybody should have a problem with that person being thrown the fuck out of there, because once again, like you said earlier, if it was a private situation, you'd be out too.
Yeah. And a lot of people have objections to the cops, and it's like, well, okay, what other entity do we have that will take care of this? Right. And there are a lot of dumb people who will say shit like, won't you just take care of it yourself? And that is the dumbest fucking take I can possibly have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go beat the shit out of a bum and kick him out of the park. What are you talking about? Like, what world are you living in? Like, I don't even know what to say to that. It's just fucking retarded. Like, yeah, it's like I'm just gonna be like, hey, honey, go sit in the car. I gotta go beat the shit out of this bum. Like,
yeah. Hey, I came strapped to the park today. Hey, honey, just put some sunglasses on, read a book or something. I'm gonna get this bum the fuck out of here. Like, are you serious? Now everybody's worse off because now you just pulled a fucking gun on a bum.
Yeah. Like, and even if I do with bare hands, I mean, like, what's going to happen? The cops aren't going to take it kindly when they come to me. Now I'm going to end up dealing with cops one way or another. Yeah. So like, I'd rather them kind of be on my side, I guess. Like, and if it's to me reacting the bum and the cops get called, it's not going to look well on me. Like, it's not like I have full reign in this area to just like kick bums out like willy nilly. Like, I don't know what world people are living in, because they're like, well, you fully have the right. And that kind of goes to the point we were getting earlier, where like that guy had the moral right to blow away those cops, but it was dumb. And I actually think in that situation, I mean, I don't, you could probably make a pretty coherent argument that I have a moral right to kick the bum out, but like, it's also really dumb. Okay. You know, people are like, well, you're not going to take care of yourself. And like, okay, sure. Okay. I don't know. It is a little disappointing to see some of the takes with that, but you know what? Like, I hope Dave Smith keeps doing shit like this and hitting on these like gray areas, that, because like, even I do like when we have situations like this, say like on Twitter or whatever, where it really shows the people of substance, because even if you disagree, like, do it a certain way, right? Like, because there are a lot of people just slam like on people and just get really stupid about it, or just have really dumb takes, and it kind of really allows people to show what you're dealing with, and you're like, oh, okay, that's who you are.
Okay, so this gets to a point that I didn't understand 6 months ago, but I'm beginning to understand more and more. So, shit posting, I know it's probably one of your favorite things. I didn't get it like 6 or 7 months ago, or however long ago, let's say the whole New Hampshire deal was. And at first, I'm like, this is retarded. Like, you people just, to normal people, you look like a bunch of fucking morons because nobody gets it. You know, they just scroll past it, whatever. But then the whole New Hampshire thing came out, and I still kind of thought, I'm like, well, I don't really think you should be saying the shit you're saying on a public page, because like, there needs to be some air of legitimacy here. But when all the terrible people who just have nothing to offer come up and jump off the bridge and out themselves and say, we're out of here, all of a sudden I'm kind of like, all right. You know, if this takes out the trash and this is the way we have to do it, I'm not losing any sleep.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I don't feel like I shit post as much, especially like my account got nuked a while ago. And it's not like I had like a huge account. I
Yeah.
was almost up to 4,000, but it was a little bit of a bummer. And now I'm like at 1,500 right now. Started back over, but I don't really shit post as much. I don't have as much time because I'm sure you're aware I was active duty military before. And
Yeah.
so being as I was a government employee, I had a whole lot more time to fuck around. Now I actually am expected to, provide some value.
Yeah.
So I don't have as much time, but yeah, no, I mean, shit posting was definitely a lot of fun, and there is definitely a lot of merit to it, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know. I just like fucking with, certain types, and I mean, I don't do as much anymore, and we used to get really into it, but I do feel like I don't know, like thinking about it now, it's almost like a lot of that work has kind of almost been done. A lot of these people that are the bad actors have kind of, I mean, while I don't care about the party side of things, the party is kind of almost a metric for the community to some extent because most
Okay.
people conflate the two, and there is a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
And a lot of the bad actors have kind of exposed themselves and have either identified else as other things, or at the very least the community has kind of expunged them.
All right.
So for example, the Sarwark, like the block Sarwark thing a while ago, like if anyone goes and unblocks, because if you don't have him blocked, you should. If you're on social media, you should block him. But if you don't have him blocked, or you want to unblock real quick just for funsies, go look at his account, see the kind of engagement he has.
Oh
It's
my
pitiful.
God. I love it. He gets ratioed
Well, he doesn't even get ratioed
so
anymore.
bad.
He'll get like 3 likes on things,
Yeah.
and
Well,
that's
no,
it.
I like. Oh God, I wish I remember.
He
It
used to
was.
get ratioed. He had an eternal ratio before, and
Yeah.
then the block Sarwark thing, which I actually did, like I
Yeah. Yeah.
started
I
that.
recall.
And now, if you go look at his shit, it is like he'll have a tweet, and it'll be like 16 hours later, and it'll still be like 3 likes, maybe like a comment. Because and he still puts out these shitty, spicy takes, begging for attention, but no one pays him any mind anymore.
Yeah.
No
It
one
was
gives a fuck about him. He's irrelevant.
the Tom Woods and Ron Paul thing. I think was probably like one of the last straws. And I remember looking through that before I was like back on Twitter, and I looked through all that. I'm like, oh my God, this is just like countless people fucking dunking on him. Like it is fucking great.
Yeah. But the dunking was keeping him alive. And
Yeah.
that's one thing I've been trying to tell. And I do think this kind of applies to real life, not to just always bring things to Twitter world, but it
Yeah.
is kind of like you can apply these maxims to real life as well. But I think like, say dunking, whether it's on Twitter, or even in real life, like say if there's someone you're just fucking with, you're slamming or, arguing with them, say it's somebody at work you're debating with. I do think there is a thing of diminishing returns, and that's my like.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
say so, and like I said, you can apply that to real world. And and it applies well to like Sarwark. For example, he got to a point where he's getting ratioed all the time. So people were slamming him all the time. And so I think dunking, slamming, whatever you want to call it, it has diminishing returns. And it over time, you get less and less out of it. And a lot of people be like, I want to be able to slap down his bad ideas. That way people can see their bad ideas. And
Yeah.
there is merit to that. But there comes a point to where like the only reason this person is even having a platform to put out his bad ideas is because you are slapping him down.
All right.
And so that's why this dunking activity or whatever has diminishing returns. And there comes a certain point to where it flips and it becomes negative returns. So you're really all you're doing is giving them you're giving them oxygen,
Right.
that's it.
Yeah,
So,
and I think especially the part where you mentioned it's negative returns, that's completely true because eventually you're gonna make people who feel bad for him because they see him saying stuff, and I'm sure maybe there's a take or two that we might agree with, but the lay person who doesn't know his history, they see him get fucking demolished, and they may either agree or they may say like, oh man, like it was a good take, and the rest of these people are assholes. He's the good dude.
yeah.
So yeah, to your point, eventually the damage has been done, and it's like well established. Like, look, nobody cares about this dude anymore. You
Yeah.
know, we're over it. So all the dunking that was to be had has been done. Let's move on. Let's focus on real things, and let's get off Twitter space and let's actually do something instead of just sitting
Yeah.
here constantly throwing firebombs on Twitter, which can be fun, but eventually you got to move away from the dumpster fire because the dumpster fire is no longer keeping you warm and you have
Yeah.
a house.
Yeah. I do think though, like I do find myself talking because Twitter is a fun place. I'm not gonna lie, and I find myself talking about a lot. But I do think a lot of the lessons you learn from
Yeah.
Twitter you can apply to real life.
Mhm.
So like with that is like if you have a coworker that you constantly argue with, there comes a certain point, especially if you are like dominating every time. Like say you're debating foreign policy at work all the time, you're always making him look like an idiot. There comes a certain point where it's like you should just stop engaging with him because all you're doing is you're all you're doing is giving him air to breathe. You're only building up the situation. That's all you're doing. There's nothing positive that's coming of this. And like yes, you may I don't know. You kind of get my point. And that applies to real life as well. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we've been going for probably close to an hour now. I think that's a pretty damn good note to end on. Life is a fantastic thing, and let's not spend our entire days dunking on people on Twitter.
Yeah.
We can go out, lift some heavy shit, spend some time with some family, or whatever you got. Or if you're like me, smoke like 60 pounds of meat in a week or something like that. So, Jose, go ahead and plug your stuff, brother. We'll get rocking and rolling.
Yeah, I have the No Way Jose show. I'm on YouTube. I'm on all the major audio podcatchers. I'm on Odyssey as well. If you want to support my work at patreon.com/just No Way Jose 2020. I'm on Twitter at God, I forgot it. It's God, because I had to change it because I got nuked. At 2020 No Way Jose is the Twitter.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I have. Well, I guess and there's not even point in saying when I have come on tomorrow because it's dropping
Next week, yeah.
So, but yeah. Anyways, by the time this is out, you guys, I'll have a Jason. Well, I guess it probably won't even be public by now. But by the time you drop your episode, but I'm about to have Jason Stapled on tomorrow. There's a time warp of podcasting because he's going to drop this, but it will still be sitting in my Patreon, not released public probably by that point. So if you want to get it, go on the Patreon or wait a few days or a week whenever this drops, and I'll have that episode out. And I've had Dave Smith. I've had a bunch of cool ones. I have my Anarchist Handbook series that is doing really well. I've had I've probably done like 9 or 10 episodes now. I'm doing for every chapter of the Anarchist Handbook, I'm doing a podcast, and I'm trying my best to get good guests for each one. I've had Thaddeus Russell, Dave Smith, Ace. I've had God, how am I blanking? I've had a lot of good guests.
Yeah, Top
Jeremy
Lobster.
Kaufman, Top Lobster. I did one myself. There's some other ones I'm not thinking of right now. I'm gonna feel like shit later, but I've had a lot of good guests. It's been a really good series. Yeah, and hopefully, I'll keep on going. But I appreciate you having me on, man. This has been fun.
Awesome, man. Well, there's actually a whole ton of stuff that I want to talk about that we didn't get to, so we'll have to do it again sometime.
Oh hell yeah,
It was awesome. So until next time, everybody, this was In Liberty and Health.